Hi, CascadiaJS. My name is Evan, and I wanted to say hello to you in full high-res HD before we get started with the presentation. And just to say thank you to the organizers for putting together this really great remote conference. They've done a lot of neat things and put a lot of care into making sure that this was not just, another Zoom call. So thank you, organizers of Cascadia. Um, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the tips and tricks I learned breaking a lot of NPM packages and fixing them along the way. So let's get started. All right, now I'm in the corner and we can let the presentation begin. So I've released a lot of really bad packages. If you ever see NPM releases that are only a few hours apart, it's a good sign that your open source maintainers are, one, awesome and quickly fix things, but it's a sign that there was something wrong with the package and it wasn't noticed until it was released. This talk is the story of my journey to be less embarrassed releasing open source packages. I release NPM packages for a living. I'm the CTO of a company that creates software to help engineers and marketers move data around. And we do that through packages we release in NPM. Our whole application is released out of a mono repo with 20 interdependent packages, and we release often more than once a week. I also maintain a number of open source projects, so I care a lot about getting package releases right. But really, this talk is about humans working together better. The whole Node.js ecosystem is rapidly changing, and for better or worse, all of our projects rely on a huge number of both private and public packages. Our jobs depend on it, our software depends on it. The more we can reduce the frustration we cause each other by having better ways to pre-release and try out our packages before they are released to the mainline, the better. I fell into this rabbit hole because of open source, but it's just as important in corporate environments. There are shared front-end frameworks, shared logging tools, shared backends that people have in private NPM repositories as well. And hopefully this applies to your workplace and not just for other open source maintainers who might be out there. So as my coworkers will tell you, I love metaphors. Metaphors are a great way to convey a new concept, building on what you already know. I think the best way to automate NPM packages builds off some of the best workflows we already have and use today to release hosted software or built software. What does it mean to apply those to NPM packages? I want to start with continuous integration and continuous deployment, CI and CD for short. Continuous integration is the concept of using automated tests to be sure that you can complete your work easily and with confidence. Usually this means doing small units of work and writing tests to make sure that what you wrote works the way you think it does. Often, more importantly, it also means using the tests that others have wrote to make sure that you didn't break anything. As projects go in complexity, it's impossible to know everything about the project, and so the tests make sure that things continue to work the way that they're supposed to. Continuous deployment, on the other hand, is automatically releasing new work to some staging server or test environment so that somebody else can check it. What's really interesting is that both of these really popular concepts in software development are all about testing. CI is about testing your work so that you have confidence you did the right thing. And continuous deployment is about letting somebody else test the work so they can be sure it does what it's supposed to for the business or for the project. So testing builds confidence. I think that bad package releases are a failure of testing. It's really hard to write tests that mess with an entire ecosystem. How can you test that package 1 that relies on package 2 that relies on package 3 is fine when package 3 releases a new version? There's all sorts of new tools out in the world, like Dependabot, which is now owned by GitHub, to automatically run tests against new versions of packages for you and things like that. But as a package developer, how can you make sure that all of your upstream folks will be happy with your new version? The next metaphor I want to get into is Git Flow. If you Google Git Flow, you end up with an entire mosaic of dots and lines and grids like this. But I want to distill it down to its essence. Really, at the bottom of Git Flow is this notion of different branches for different purposes. You start with an integration branch. An integration branch, taken by itself, is just a linear history of your project. Each one of these dots is a commit, and as you add new features, it just goes up and to the right. The next branch is the release branch. This is what your customers end up seeing. Periodically, you'll take your integration branch, tag it to the release branch, and that'll get deployed onto a production server or sent out to the App Store for people to use. What's interesting about the release branch is that it's really just taking a snapshot of the integration branch at some moment and saying, yes, we think this is good enough to give it to our customers. Let's use this. you're probably skipping over a number of those integration branch dots until it's ready to release the next version. Finally, the feature branch is where a developer does their work. You'll take a snapshot of the integration branch, do your work, make some changes, try it out a few times, and when you're ready and when you think you're done, you'll put it back in the integration branch. What's really interesting is that I think these branches are better described as who's they're for. Feature branches are for developers. Integration branches are for PMs and leads to do acceptance and try things out. And then the release branch is what your customers or users actually end up using. So Git Flow works great for when you're building a deployed or hosted application. But what does Git Flow look like with build artifacts? Build artifacts in our case are NPM packages that we're going to ship out to the NPM repository. But build artifacts can mean a lot of stuff, like bundled software that might be an iPhone app or a tarball that you might download to run. Build artifact is the term that GitHub and others use to mean some sort of compiled or zipped up version of your code base. So because this is a conference, I would like to propose to you an idea I like to call NPM Flow. NPM Flow is like Git Flow, but it includes this notion of build artifacts. We do this because we can't fully test our packages, the end result of our work, inside of our own project. We need to have the rest of the ecosystem involved, NPM, some other project that consumes it, around to be really sure that our work is doing what it's supposed to. So NPM Flow builds on Git Flow, and along the way, we're going to publish packages that make sense for each of our branches. The stable branch in this case, or what used to be called the production branch, is where we build our packages that most people use. This is what people will install when they NPM install your package. The normal versions come from here, V09, V1, etc. And this is what people use in their day-to-day work. The integration branch, though, and the feature branch, we can tag and name in a certain way that only we're going to use them internally. And they relate to the feature or tag that we're working on. So our feature branch could be called feature. Our integration branch could always be called alpha, or if you're Next.js, it could be called canary. And this gives us a way to build packages at every integration point that we can keep around and test and make sure they work the way we want. What's cool about this too is that this maintains this notion that every branch is for a different type of user. The feature branch is for people working on the code base. The integration branch is, again, for people who test the work. Maybe it's PMs or leads, but someone who is trying out the package. And the stable branch is, again, for users, for the package consumers in this case. So putting this all together, NPM Flow can take metaphors from both Git Flow and CI/CD. The whole notion of having a Git branch for each piece of work and for each type of consumer, we can use NPM tags for. Having example projects like a staging app or a test app, we can still do, just like we did with CI and CD. And they're going to consume different tags of our project. So instead of having a staging release and a production release, we're going to have a next tag and a latest tag on our packages. In this way, we can still test our work out using real NPM packages, but not yet publishing them in a way that everybody else will use, to be sure that we're ready to move on to the next step in the release cycle. So it's time for a demo. First, I need to apologize to Carter and the rest of the folks that work on CascadiaJS because I kind of stole your name. I now own CascadiaJS, the NPM package, and when I'm done, I'll give it back to you. I apologize. But I made a small demo here. So if you run npx CascadiaJS, you can install the public version, the latest released version of the project. And if you run npx CascadiaJS at next, you can try a pre-release version. Next is a tag that is ahead of the regular CascadiaJS release. And if you weren't able to run this yourself, here's what would have happened. Running npx CascadiaJS by itself would have just printed, hello, CascadiaJS. Pretty boring, pretty basic. And if you were to run the next version of this in a console screen big enough, you would have seen a bunch of cool animations go by. So how does this work? The main notion here is that NPM actually has two ways to differentiate versions or flavors of packages. There's the version number, which is the semver version number that has to be unique and goes up as you go. But there's also this thing called tags. And all NPM packages have tags, whether you realize it or not. If you look at the CascadiaJS package on NPM right now, you'll see we have a couple of versions, 001, 002, 003, and then 004 next, which is tagged with next, and 003 is tagged with latest. You can see that at the top there with current tags. And what you might not know is the default tag is called latest. This is sort of how Docker does it as well. Whereas if you don't supply a tag, NPM is going to give it the tag latest. When you publish something to NPM, you can choose which tag you use. So when I published version 004-next, I told NPM to use the tag next. What's also going on here, which is pretty interesting, is the last part of your version doesn't have to be a number. It can be anything. In this case, it's 4-next. You can use a branch name here. You can add more dots. So I could have, 4. It doesn't really matter. But this is how I published this package. So we can have a next version that didn't mess with the previous latest version. So when I published version 004 of this package, I used the --tag next command. This told NPM that this version shouldn't overwrite what is latest. So the normal install of the CascadiaJS package would still be version 003. But it let me put something else up there that people could try. Anyone in the world who has access to my NPM package can use it. And this is a pre-release that certain people can try out, make sure it works the way we want, that I'm not going to overwrite and change what the latest tag points to until I'm ready. When I think this version is ready, I'll get rid of the .next part of the version and publish this to the latest tag, and then this will be what the default install is. So how can we automate package creation? Like any other good part of a CI or CD workflow, it has to be automatic. It has to let us know if something goes wrong, because the whole point of it is to do things that we might forget to do. Here are 5 keys to the workflow we use at Grouparoo that really help us out. The first thing we learned is to use the NPM prepare lifecycle hook. Inevitably, your project is going to have something you have to do to build it. Maybe you have to compile assets, minify it, run Webpack, convert your TypeScript into JavaScript. There's always something. And you have to make sure you do it every time before you publish. Prepare is this magic lifecycle command that runs before NPM install, before NPM test, and before NPM start. If you put your compilation step in the prepare directive, it's always going to get run. The next trick is learning how NPM and Git relate to each other. By default, NPM will actually use your git ignore file when it publishes stuff. This is normally great, but if you had a build step, you might ignore your build directory. So very commonly in a git ignore for a TypeScript project, you'll ignore your dist directory. This is where you actually put your JavaScript that you've made from your TypeScript. But you really want that published for NPM because that's what people will be using when they use your package. If you have a .npm ignore alongside your .git ignore, that's hard to say, NPM will use the .npm ignore file and ignore the .git ignores file. It's very hard to say. But you'll need both of them, or else NPM will never publish the stuff you've built if you have it ignored in Git. Okay, so let's get into the nuances of this NPM flow thing. We want our CI tool, we want the robot, to do the versioning for us and releasing packages for us. Unlike when you're publishing a website, for example, the CI tool actually has to mess with our code and commit it back to our integration branch. This is the whole notion of changing that version number. So there's 4 steps to this. The first is to use the npm version command, which can take a bunch of arguments, like pre-patch, the pre-ID is what you want to call it, and the message, because npm version also does a git commit for us. So in this example, we'll be making a new alpha pre-release, a pre-patch as they call it, and we'll be using a special message with no CI in brackets to make our git commit. We do this because this no CI thing, many CI tools know how to use that and not just keep rerunning CI because we're going to keep making changes. It'll go into a loop if it doesn't ignore it. So to make that work, we have to make sure that our continuous integration tool knows how to access NPM. And the easiest way to do that is by writing a .npmrc file into the home directory in CI. You can get a token from NPM. This is how you authenticate to NPM. And if you run this command, we're going to write that line with our special token into our npm rc file. Most CI tools have a way to store environment variables in a secure way. This is how we're going to write that token only when we need it. When we publish to NPM, you got to make sure to always include the tag. This is step 3. Even though we told NPM when we were making our version to use a pre-release with the alpha namespace, it doesn't actually know to use alpha or next when it writes the tag. So we have to be sure to tell it again to do that. And then finally, step 4 is we need to push back our changes to our Git branch. The npm version command changed our package.json and wrote a new version in there. And we want to make sure that we have that in our code base. So CI has to push back to itself. And this is why that no CI message in the commit message was really important. Now that we have our CI server building packages for us on every change to the integration branch, we can have a test app that knows how to use it. On the left, we have a stable app, and this is how our customers will interact with our project. They'll either say they want a specific version, like CascadiaJS 001, or they might say latest, or they might have one of those hats or tildes to indicate a version range. But latest, now that we know that there's tags in NPM, latest doesn't mean get me the newest Semver version. It actually means get me the newest version that matches the tag latest, and latest just happens to be the default tag. So now that we know that tags are allowed to be used in package.json files, on the right in our test app, we can actually use next or alpha. So if we wanted to use the preview version of the CascadiaJS package, we would put next in there. So every time you run npm update, it'll get the newest Semver version that matches the next tag. This is how we can have a test app that always pulls from the pre-release versions, as long as we run npm update before we install. So now that we know how to publish a release off of every change of our integration branch, how do we handle the stable branch? How do we handle the package releases that our customers are really going to use, the mainline releases, the latest releases? I highlighted these arrows going back from the stable branch to the integration branch, because just like before, when you publish a version, it's going to change the package JSON, and we have to get that code back to the integration branch again. This is a little bit different than Git Flow, where you wouldn't make a change to your code base in the stable branch. So the steps for doing this are pretty much the same as they were before. We're going to make a new version with npm version. We're ignoring all the pre-IDs and special names this time. We're just making a normal patch release. We're granting our CI tool access to npm with our auth token again. And we're pushing to npm. This time we'll use the tag latest, or we can skip the tag entirely. What's different here is that we need to rebase or push back to our integration branch somehow after we make these changes, because npm version patch, again, changes the package JSON, and we want them to go back. So step 4 is all about pushing these changes from our stable branch back to our integration branch. So how do you know it's time to release a new version? How do you know that you should push to the stable branch, triggering a release of the mainline latest tag? Well, we can't automate that. Just like with normal Git Flow, we still have to have a human in the loop. Can't automate everything. There's still a human who needs to decide that this code is ready to go, good enough, will make our customers happy, and it's worth putting out to production. You'll need to figure out how to tell your CI system, is this a patch release? Is this a major release or a minor release? And so many times, the production releases, the stable branch releases, are actually not automated. There's a human who runs this script and decides this is a minor or major version change. And that's how NPM Flow works. You can hook into the changes in your Git branches. You can automate package creation. And you can really just overwhelm NPM with packages. People think that NPM is really only public consumption. If you look at popular open source projects like Next.js or Webpack, you'll see there's a ton of these alpha and canary releases. They publish them all the time. So don't be afraid to make a ton of NPM packages to test your work. It really is the best way to ensure that your package works within the ecosystem it's intended to work at. And NPM already includes all the tooling we need to do this properly. Thank you, everyone.
Yay! Awesome job, Evan. That was a great talk. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Also, I love the art behind you. That's super cool. Oh, that's so
Do you
fun.
like Pokemon? I happen to like Homestar Runner. We all have our favorite
We have our
cartoons.
things. Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. Well, anyway, thank you so much for that talk. I'm incredibly motivated to start publishing like libraries and suites of packages with proper tags and everything. So that was great. I appreciate that. So we do have some questions from the audience, and so first of all, for just newbies getting started, how do you recommend someone just getting started publishing their own package and doing something? How do you determine if something's useful enough to publish? What do you suggest as a first step?
Nice. I think there's a theme that I've noticed at Cascadia, which I really love, which is about learning and working in the open, which is just getting started with low risk things. And when I started this, I thought NPM, like publishing to NPM, was a high risk activity. Like my work is really out there, someone might use it, it might not be good enough, or it might break something. Um, and really, like my main takeaway, I hope from this talk is that it doesn't have to be that way. When you publish to NPM,
Mm-hmm.
you can pick a different tag, you can try something new. It's free. They're really good at hosting stuff. They're not going to get mad if you add one more package to it. Um, so really, just try it. Like there's really low to no risk to doing this, and there's plenty of commands to unpublish something. I didn't talk about it in the talk, but you can actually change tags. You can remove a tag from a branch and move it around. So if you publish something you don't like, you can move the latest or the next tag around. Really just try it. It's
Yeah,
totally accessible and totally safe.
you won't break everything.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
another question from the group: do you keep all of those different branches around, or do you ever clean them up? How do you end up with a project that doesn't have just tons and tons of branches for all of the different releases and things that you've tried? Do you have a strategy for
Yeah,
that?
there's a ton of different philosophies around Git branching and how you merge things and how long you keep them around for. Um, your mileage may vary. What I tend to do where I work is automatically delete branches when they're merged and automatically delete tags from NPM once that feature is done. So there's kind of a cleanup
Mm.
process for when an epic or feature is done. You kind of delete the old tags, you delete the old branches as well. But it's sort of a personal preference for the company and the team you're on. The good news is it works either way. You might have a long history of branches and tags that you might not need anymore. But again, it's not going to hurt anyone. It might just be confusing.
Is there a risk of getting rid of some old tag that someone's using that where all of a sudden their code won't work if they install in that case?
There could be, yeah, totally. And so that's why this kind of strategy around this is really interesting. Um, One, most people should really be only using latest. That's important, and that's really all you should publish
Right.
and talk about on your websites and things like that. There are some tools NPM gives you to see how many people are downloading each version of things, which is a good hint to make sure that no one has been using it. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, you could end up hurting someone's project. Um, But one other thing that's important is those version numbers are not linked to those tags too. Those version numbers will always be unique. And you can remove a tag without removing a version number. So you can keep an old version around that someone might be using, but move the next or latest tag forward.
Mm.
And that way they can keep the old project around just in case.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much, Evan. This was awesome. I really appreciate your talk and just making that clear for everybody as well.